An unusual sight in the mountains of Colorado has a lot of people talking.
It has some people asking, is that Bigfoot?
For decades, the proof stayed grainy and far away, until now. A wave of footage has surfaced so crisp it shows these creatures up close. The hairless face of an infant clinging to its mother's back. The eyes of something far larger catching the light in the dark. What comes next moves from the faintest early traces to the clearest footage ever recorded, building toward a confrontation no one was meant to capture. The wood booger.
By popular demand, we've decided to look at a famous piece of Bigfoot footage.
The trail begins more than half a century ago. In 1969, a lone hiker moving through the dense forests of East Texas raised a camera and captured a few seconds of black and white film. In it, a large Bigfoot-like creature strides into an open clearing, its heavy frame crossing the open ground in silence, before the film abruptly cuts off. The footage is grainy and brief, the kind of fragment easy to wave away as a misjudged distance or a man in a coat. But it does not stand alone. It belongs to a long tradition of wild man sightings told across the American South, where this figure was known as the Texas wood booger. For generations, people described a huge, hairy being that haunted the most remote forests, swamps, and river bottoms of the eastern part of the state. The word booger was old Southern slang for something frightening that hid in the woods, a term once used to warn children away from the tree line after dark. What the hiker filmed that day looked exactly like the thing those warnings had always described, upright and towering, and gone before anyone could follow it. For a long time, footage like this was the best the subject had to offer. Distant, degraded, impossible to confirm. A shape in the trees, a figure that vanished before the lens could focus. It was enough to keep the legend breathing and never enough to prove it. The 1969 clip set the pattern that would hold for the next half-century. Something was out there, just past the edge of what the camera could resolve, and it had no intention of stepping closer. Tracks in the snow.
An intriguing discovery is being investigated in a community east of Seattle. Someone came across a lengthy trail of extremely large footprints.
The next trace appeared far more recently, surfacing online in December of 2023, filmed not far from a location already well known for Bigfoot sightings. There was no creature in the frame this time. There was only what it had left behind. Pressed deep into a stretch of fresh snow was a line of enormous footprints. The edges had melted and widened in the open air, but the shape held, long, broad impressions far larger and wider than any human foot could make, with the unmistakable spread of individual toes still visible across the surface. The depth of each one spoke to real weight, something heavy enough to sink into packed snow with every stride. And there was not one set of tracks, but two. One large, one noticeably smaller, the trails running close together, side by side, as though a parent had moved through the drift with a smaller one kept near. To those who found them, the pairing suggested something more unsettling than a lone animal wandering through the cold, a parent and a juvenile, moving in step across open ground. The prints offered no answer about what had made them. They only confirmed that something two-legged, far too large to easily name, and apparently not traveling alone, had crossed that snow and walked on into the trees, long gone by the time anyone arrived. The enhancements. By May of 2026, the technology had begun to reach back into the archive. A wave of older, hopelessly blurry sightings was run through modern enhancement, and for the first time, the smeared shapes buried inside them resolved into something that could actually be studied. A tall figure on a snowbound mountain, long dismissed as a trick of distance and glare, sharpened into an upright form looming against the white. The decades-old Colorado train sighting clarified into a dark, swinging armed silhouette that echoed the posture of the most famous Bigfoot film ever shot. A blurred mass crossing a field resolved into a massive shape, standing far too erect to be any creature on four legs. A split-second blur glimpsed by a man skiing down a slope emerged as a looming form frozen for an instant among the trees. One after another, footage written off for years was pulled back into focus. The enhancements proved nothing on their own. A sharper blur is still a blur. But they changed the question because the shapes people had reported all along had always been there in the frame, waiting only for a lens clear enough to show them. That lens was about to arrive. From this point on, the footage needs no enhancement at all, and the next thing the cameras caught was standing in broad daylight. The clearest capture. For all the distance and grain of what came before, the subject had remained safely abstract, a shape that could always be argued away. That distance did not last. In late August of 2025, a single image emerged from California that changed the conversation entirely. It was not distant. It was not blurry. It was a close high-definition capture taken in broad daylight, and the detail it held was almost impossible to reconcile with a hoax. The setting was ordinary enough. A stretch of thick brush somewhere in the California backcountry, sunlight filtering down through the vegetation, the kind of dense, overgrown ground that hides far more than it ever reveals. Whoever raised the camera that day cannot have expected what the lens would hold. There was no buildup, no warning, only an everyday wall of green that suddenly contained something that should not have been standing in it. The shutter caught a humanoid, primate-like figure mid-stride, moving through the undergrowth on two legs. The posture was wrong for any known animal, too tall, too vertical, too human in the set of the shoulders to belong to any monkey or ape. But it was not the adult that stopped people cold. It was what rode on its back. Clinging to the figure's shoulders was a smaller creature, an infant, asleep, its tiny hands curled into the fur the way a human child clutches at a parent carrying it home. And its face was visible. The small face was free of hair, a soft grayish color, eerily childlike in its features. Not the muzzle of an animal, something closer to a sleeping child, carried through the brush on the back of something that, by every account, should not exist. The realism is what unsettles investigators most. Recreating a single convincing suit is difficult enough. Staging a second, infant-sized figure, fitting it with a lifelike hairless face, and posing it asleep against the back of the first, deep in remote brush, with no visible seam or zipper or flaw to give it away, is a far harder thing to fake. And it aligns with something witnesses have described for as long as the legend has existed. Again and again, those who claim encounters report not lone animals, but family groups. Adults moving in the company of smaller individuals. Juveniles riding on backs across long distances. The image from California showed, in unbearable clarity, exactly the scene those reports had always described. The photograph answers nothing about where the creatures come from, or what they are, or how they have stayed hidden. It only confirms, in detail too fine to dismiss, that whatever was caught moving through that brush was carrying its young, and that it never once looked toward the camera that found it. There is no struggle in the image, no flight, no awareness of being seen, just an adult moving its child through cover with the unhurried calm of something that has done it 1,000 times before, in a place it clearly considered its own. Whatever was photographed in that California brush was not lost and not displaced. It was at home. The footage only grows clearer and closer from here. Subscribe to follow the evidence as it surfaces. The faceless figure. If the California image was disturbing for how human it looked, the next was disturbing for how little of it could be read at all. An older piece of footage, far clearer than its age should allow, shows an upright figure standing in a clearing deep within a dense jungle, somewhere far removed from the forests of North America. The creature is powerfully built, strong and heavily muscled, holding itself upright in the open with no apparent fear of being seen. It resembles the familiar descriptions of Bigfoot, and yet something about it is profoundly wrong. Its face is angular and pale, turned toward the camera, and where its features should be, there is almost nothing at all. No nose, no mouth, only two dark sunken eyes set into a blank, colorless face, staring back across the clearing. The footage is short, a handful of seconds, but the image of that featureless face lingers long after the frame goes dark. Because it does not fit the typical Sasquatch profile, some have reached for older legends to account for it. The Almas, described across Mongolia and Central Asia, less as a giant ape than as a surviving primitive human. The Woodwoes of medieval Europe, the wild hairy man said to live in the deepest forests. Both traditions describe something caught between human and beast, dwelling in country no one else would willingly enter. The figure in the jungle clearing fits neither cleanly. It simply stands there, faceless and patient, watching the lens until the footage runs out and takes the answer with it. The hunter above. The encounters that followed were no longer captured from a safe distance. They were filmed by people who suddenly found the creature within arm's reach. The first came from a hunter, alone in the forest late at night. He had climbed high into a tree and settled onto a branch. the way hunters do when they want the advantage of elevation, a clear vantage over the ground below, and a position from which to wait and watch unseen. The woods around him were black and silent, the kind of dark that swallows the edges of everything. He had come for game, and he expected at most the cautious approach of the animal he was hunting. He did not expect company of any other kind. What he heard instead was something large moving through the brush below, heavy, deliberate, drawing steadily closer to the base of his tree. The footfalls were wrong for a deer, too spaced, too weighted, landing with a slow and even confidence rather than the nervous tread of prey. He went still, the kind of instinctive stillness that arrives before conscious thought. Every muscle locked, breath held shallow, and slowly raised his camera toward the source of the sound. Out of the dark beneath him walked a figure that belonged to nothing he recognized. Large, robust, and unmistakably upright, it crossed the ground directly under his perch, its dark frame filling the space he had been watching all night. Then it stopped, and it looked up at him. For a single moment, the creature's eyes caught the light and threw it back. A flat, reflective eye shine, the cold mirror glow that animal eyes produce in the dark and human eyes never do. In that instant, the distance between hunter and hunted collapsed entirely. The thing he had been watching for was now watching him, and it knew exactly where he was. It held his gaze without alarm, then turned and moved off into the trees, its back broad and heavily muscled, the fur lying flush and tight against the sheer bulk of its body as it melted back into the dark. The footage was recorded years ago, long before artificial intelligence could fabricate such a scene, and what it shows resists every easy explanation. What it leaves behind is harder still. The creature had seen him. It had fixed him in place from below, met his eyes, and then chosen to walk away. Whether it had simply lost interest, or registered the weapon he carried, or decided for reasons entirely its own that he was not worth the effort, no one can say. It let him live. It never once explained why. Caught on dash cam. The second close encounter was not sought out at all. It was captured by a driver moving down a forested road in the fading light of evening, a dash camera running quietly on the dashboard the way it does on any ordinary drive home. There was no expedition, no hunt, no search for the unknown. There was only the road ahead, the trees crowding hard against both shoulders, and the last of the daylight draining out of the sky. Then something came out of the tree line. A large, ape-like figure broke from the side of the road and launched itself directly into the vehicle's path. The dash camera caught it in a single frozen frame. A powerful body suspended in mid-leap, blurred by the speed of its own motion, captured in the very act of crossing into the lane. Behind it, the low evening sun threw its entire front into deep shadow, swallowing the face and the details, leaving only the unmistakable silhouette of something massive vaulting out of the forest and into the road. And there, the record ends. The frozen image was the only thing recovered from the encounter. What happened in the seconds afterward was never reported. Whether the vehicle struck the figure, whether the driver braked hard enough to stop in time, whether the creature cleared the road in a single bound and vanished into the far trees or turned to face the oncoming headlights, none of it is known. The frame holds the instant of the leap and nothing beyond it, a shape exploding out of the dark toward a moving car, frozen forever, an arm's length from impact, with no record at all of how the night ended for the figure or the person behind the wheel. The road was empty before it, and empty again after. For one frame, something the size of a man and far heavier hung in the air between the trees and the windshield. And then it was simply gone, leaving a still image and a silence where the rest of the story should have been. The money shot. Everything before, it had been a single figure, a single frame, a lone trail in the snow. The footage that came out of Montana was something else entirely. It was not one creature, it was several, and they were moving with what looked unmistakably like intent. A small crew, led by two men named Duke and Eric, had pushed deep into a remote stretch of Montana forest, searching for exactly the kind of evidence the subject is built on. What they found first was not a creature, but its handiwork. A cluster of strange wooden structures, heavy branches and whole trunks arranged in ways the forest does not arrange on its own. The kind of formation investigators of the phenomenon call a structure complex, the suspected work of something large, strong, and deliberate. Deep in that remote country, far from any road or trail, the structures alone were enough to put the entire crew on edge. Then they understood that they were not alone in it. Three separate figures had begun to move through the trees around them, watching. shifting position, pacing the outer edges of the clearing while keeping to the cover of the timber. The movement was patient and unhurried, never fully exposed, each figure sliding from one screen of trees to the next, in a way that spoke of coordination rather than coincidence. The crew was being circled by something that did not want to be seen all at once. As they began to withdraw from the area, the largest of the three made itself known. From somewhere back in the trees came a sharp, hollow wood knock, a single deliberate strike of wood against wood, the sound long tied to these creatures in witness report after witness report, ringing out across the clearing as a clear and unmistakable signal. It was not a sound the forest makes on its own. It was an answer, aimed directly at the people standing in the clearing. And then, for a few unbearable seconds, the largest figure stepped into view. At first, it was almost completely hidden, a vast shape shifting behind the heavy screen of trunks and branches, more suggestion than form, its outline breaking apart between the trees every time it moved. The crew held the camera on it, barely breathing, tracking the slow drift of something far too big to be a man through cover that should have stopped anything its size. Then it passed an opening in the vegetation, and it stopped. Through that single narrow gap, the creature turned its head and looked directly out at them. Directly, the men would later say, at Eric. The face that filled the gap was nothing that could have been thrown together in the moment. The head was crowned with the classic high, dome-shaped ridge. The skin of the face was grayish and pale, carrying little to no hair across it. The eyes were dark and intense, fixed and fully aware, set deep above a heavy, powerful bone structure that gave the whole face the cast of something predatory, something that had been watching the crew long before any of them sensed it. For the length of a single held breath, the face stayed in the gap, regarding them through the trees with complete and silent attention, and then it withdrew and was gone. This is the footage that proves hardest to dismiss. Not a single ambiguous frame, but a layered encounter stacked detail on detail. The structures, the coordinated movement of three figures, the deliberate wood knock, and finally the face itself, all in one place, all unfolding at once. Subscribe to follow each new case as it surfaces. What the Montana crew filmed does not resolve. There was no charge, no second sighting, no explanation offered by anything that happened next. There were only three figures that had quietly encircled them in the timber, a face that had studied them through a narrow gap in the trees, and the long, unbroken silence of the forest after it stepped back into the dark. The crew did not stay to test it. They withdrew the way prey withdraws, slowly and without turning their backs, carrying out the one clear look at a face that should not exist. And the silence followed them, telling them with absolute and final certainty that they had been the ones under observation from the very beginning, and that whatever had been watching them was still out there among the trees, motionless, patient, watching them leave.